My name is Sophia Reynolds. I'm 37 years old, and the night my own brother tried to erase my entire life, I didn't say a single word. He stood 3 tables away from me, inside that cold, wood-paneled disciplinary hearing room. His navy suit was perfectly pressed, his smile polished like he was delivering closing arguments in one of his big corporate cases. Behind him, our parents sat, dressed like they were attending a funeral. My funeral. They nodded along as he told the panel of strangers that I had been practicing law illegally for years. He said I forged my credentials. He said every client I ever defended had been deceived. He said I was never a real attorney, just a fraud ass in a good suit who had slipped through the cracks long enough to poison the system. I sat there with my hands folded on the table, spine straight, breathing slow and steady. The kind of silence that comes not from fear, but from absolute certainty. I watched the color drain from the presiding judge's face the moment he opened my file. His hand tightened around the folder. He turned one page, then another, and suddenly went completely still. In that frozen second, I knew he saw exactly what my brother had done. Without saying a word, the judge stood up, clutched the file to his chest like it was something dangerous, and disappeared into his chambers. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. My brother's confident smile twitched. My mother stopped breathing mid-sigh. My father looked offended, confused, and furious all at once. And right then, with a cold clarity that felt almost like relief, I knew someone was going to be destroyed that night. It just wasn't going to be me. Before I tell you what the judge found in that file and why my brother ended up on his knees begging before the hearing was even over, let me ask you something. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one because stories like this travel far when they hit something familiar. If you've ever been the difficult one in your family, the one who didn't fit the perfect picture they wanted, then you already understand why my brother stood there so eager to bury me. To understand that night, you first have to understand the family I came from. A family that never believed in love unless it could be measured, displayed, and admired by other people. The Reynolds family didn't do love. We did performances. My father built his reputation as one of the top cardiologists in Seattle. He could save wealthy executives from heart attacks at 60 and charm an entire hospital board in the same afternoon. At home, though, his voice carried a different tone. Sharper, more impatient, like we were inconveniences interrupting his important life. My mother turned charity luncheons into theater. She wore her generosity like expensive jewelry, always making sure the right people saw how kind and selfless she was. Behind closed doors, she was calculating, always measuring what everything cost her in social currency. And then there was Derek, my older brother. From the moment he was born, he was their masterpiece. The right schools, the right handshake, the right jawline that looked perfect in every family photo. He learned early that in our house, being loved meant being useful to the family narrative. He became exactly what they wanted. Ambitious, polished, and always performing. I never fit that narrative. I was the child who asked the wrong questions at the wrong time, the daughter who hated rehearsed manners and polite lies. I noticed how my father spoke more gently to his wealthy patients than to his own children. I was still brilliant, and somehow that made it worse. They couldn't dismiss me as stupid, so they labeled me difficult instead. I remember one Christmas dinner when I was 16. My father was boasting about a major donation he had secured for the hospital. I quietly asked why we didn't use some of that money to help the families who couldn't afford his surgeries. The table went silent. My mother gave me that tight smile she reserved for embarrassing moments. Derek just shook his head like I was a lost cause. That was the pattern of my childhood. Constant reminders that I was the glitch in their perfect system. By the time Derek and I both finished law school, the difference between us had become unforgivable in their eyes. He went into corporate litigation at a towering downtown firm where lawyers billed hundreds of dollars an hour to make powerful clients look cleaner than they actually were. I chose criminal defense. I had spent too many years watching how money decided who received dignity and who didn't. I wanted to stand beside the people the system had already written off. At first, my parents treated my choice like a temporary rebellion, something a clever daughter would eventually outgrow. Then I won my first big jury trial. I made the mistake of telling them about it over dinner. I can still picture that night so clearly. The heavy silverware, the cold light from the chandelier, Derek, leaning back in his chair, with a glass of wine like a young king, listening to peasants speak. I told them how I had defended a 19-year-old warehouse worker who was falsely accused of armed robbery. How I had torn apart the state's timeline on cross-examination and gotten him acquitted. I was still buzzing with adrenaline, still naive enough to think real justice might actually impress them. My father didn't congratulate me. He asked if I planned to spend my career cleaning up after criminals. My mother sighed and said she dreaded what she would tell her friends at the club. Derek smiled that patient, cruel smile of his and said, "You've confused martyrdom with legal skill, Sophia. Any real lawyer could make in one afternoon what you're making in a month defending the human debris of the city." I looked at him across the table and replied, "At least my clients are honest about who they are." That was the moment the room truly turned against me. My father called me disrespectful. My mother said I was shaming the family name. Derek's words cut the deepest. "You chose the gutter because you weren't built for the top floor." I stood up before dessert was served. My father warned me that if I walked out that door, I would lose everything that came with being a Reynolds. I told him I would rather lose their money than spend the rest of my life renting my soul back from them one approval at a time. I left that house carrying nothing but my purse, my law degree, and a cold rage that felt almost useful. That night in the driveway, Derek called after me and said I would come crawling back within a year. I turned around and told him he should pray I never had a reason to stand across from him in court. At the time, it was just anger. Years later, I realized it had been prophecy. That night, I drove away from the family house with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. For the first time, I wasn't trying to earn a place at their table. I was going to build my own. I rented a small office on the 4th floor of an old building above a Vietnamese noodle restaurant in South Seattle. The sign on the glass door read, "Reynolds Justice Group." Not because I wanted to keep their name, but because I refused to let them own it. The waiting room had 2 mismatched chairs, a second-hand desk, and a radiator that knocked like someone was trapped inside the wall all winter long. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I lived on coffee, yellow legal pads, and the kind of stubbornness people often mistake for recklessness until it starts winning. In those early years, I defended people nobody else wanted to stand next to. Single mothers charged with fraud for using a better address to get their kids into good schools, immigrants pushed into plea deals they barely understood, young men with prior records who were treated as guilty the moment they walked into the courtroom. Every week, I saw how quickly the system could crush someone who couldn't afford to look respectable. That reality kept me going, even when money was tight and the cases were heavy. I hired Ramon Ellis first, a former court clerk with an almost supernatural memory for filings and procedural traps. Then came Tessa Vaughn, a sharp young attorney with tattooed wrists, a ferocious mind, and zero patience for polished liars. The three of us built something real. We checked everything twice. We never trusted neat timelines. We treated every piece of evidence like it had a second hidden life. That approach helped us survive. It also made us enemies. Prosecutors disliked lawyers who actually read the files. Corporate firms hated how my name started showing up in local news whenever I dismantled their cases in open court. Derek watched all of it from his glass tower downtown. He never called to congratulate me. Instead, he sent little weapons. Articles about burnout in solo practice, emails about bankruptcies, links to stories of criminal defense attorneys facing misconduct charges. No message in the body, just the link. Like he was tapping on the glass of my life, waiting for it to crack. But I didn't crack. I kept winning. Then came the case that truly changed everything. It started on a stormy Tuesday night. A woman named Marcus Hale's sister called my office in a panic. Her brother, owner of a mid-sized logistics company, had been charged in a complex financial fraud investigation. The case was tied to a predatory takeover attempt by a much larger competitor with strong political connections. Bigger firms had refused the case. The risk was too high, the opposition too powerful. When I read the charging documents, something felt wrong. The evidence was too perfectly arranged. The timelines too convenient. Real fraud is messy. This looked staged. I took the case anyway. The trial was assigned to Judge Harlan Whitaker, the most respected and feared judge in the county. He was old school, exacting, and completely unimpressed by big firm theatrics or family names. On the first day, he looked at my modest suit and solo firm stamp with clear skepticism. By day 3, that skepticism had disappeared. With Ramon and Tessa's help, we tore apart the server logs, witness statements, and metadata. We proved the so-called whistleblower had been paid off by the competing company trying to swallow Marcus's business. On cross-examination, I broke their star witness with one delivery log, one timestamp, and one question he wasn't prepared for. When the jury returned the not guilty verdict, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Judge Whitaker said nothing from the bench, but as the room emptied, his bailiff handed me a folded note. It read, "Miss Reynolds, that was rare clarity of purpose. Don't let this city dull it." I kept that note in my desk drawer. Not because I needed a judge's approval, but because for the first time in years, someone inside the system had truly seen me. Derek saw the news coverage too. So did my parents. I know they watched my face on the evening news and felt the same irritation they always felt when I succeeded without them. My success destroyed their favorite story, that I was the weak, difficult daughter who would eventually fail. What I didn't know at the time was that while I was building my name, Derek was quietly destroying his. From the outside, Derek's life still looked perfect. Downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows, country club memberships, luxury car, expensive watch, and carefully curated photos from ski trips and private dinners that he loved posting online. Happiness for him always needed witnesses. But behind the scenes, cracks had started to form. He had tied himself to a private crypto investment scheme that he pitched to several wealthy clients as a smart wealth preservation opportunity. When the investments began losing money, he started making temporary transfers from client escrow accounts to cover the losses. What started as arrogance slowly turned into straight-up embezzlement, one justified transaction at a time. He kept believing he could smooth everything over before anyone noticed. Then the market shifted again. One major client demanded a full reconciliation, and Derek found himself staring at an audit that was about to blow his entire career apart. He needed two things at once: a dramatic public act of moral heroism to make himself untouchable, and a fresh stream of high-value cases to help cover the growing hole in his accounts. I was the perfect solution. By then, my firm had gained real visibility. Several of my active cases were high-profile and media-sensitive. Exactly the kind of matters bigger firms wanted to absorb. Derek realized that if he could publicly expose me as a fake attorney, he could play the role of the brave brother who chose the profession over blood. Then his firm could step in, rescue my abandoned clients, and he could quietly fix his own financial mess. It was cold. It was calculated. And it sounded exactly like the kind of strategy a man like Derek would admire. He didn't pitch the plan to our parents as fraud. He framed it as reputation management. He told them he had discovered irregularities in my credentials. He reminded them how embarrassing it would be if this became public without the family appearing proactive. He gave them the role they loved most. The dignified victims who chose principle over blood. My mother, who had barely spoken to me in years, suddenly found a way to participate in my destruction because it looked respectable. My father, who had always valued institutional power more than truth, believed his golden son without question. Together, they built the file. Derek leaned on an IT specialist at his firm who had his own gambling debts and could be bought with fear and money. They forged an old bar exam failure notice, manipulated digital headers, created fake email exchanges, and altered records to make it look like my license belonged to a retired attorney. They even got one of my mother's social acquaintances to sign an affidavit describing me as unstable. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to look believable to people who didn't check the seams. When the formal disciplinary complaint arrived at my office with Derek's signature and both my parents' sworn statements attached, I read it twice. Once as a daughter. That reading hurt in a deep, aching way I hadn't expected. The second time as a lawyer. That reading sharpened me. I called Elena Morales the best disciplinary defense attorney in our legal community. She arrived at my office in a dark wool coat, read the entire complaint in silence, then set the papers down and said, "This isn't a grievance, Sophia. This is an execution attempt." Those words helped more than any comfort ever could. They named exactly what this was. That was the moment I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to finish it. That same afternoon, my small conference room turned into a war room. Elena, Ramon, Tessa, and I spread every document across the table. I read the complaint once more, this time line by line, looking for every weakness. My parents had signed sworn statements claiming they remembered receiving my supposed bar exam failure notice years ago. They said they had only recently found the courage to come forward because they had been misled by my lies. Derek's complaint was written with the dramatic sorrow of a man auditioning for sainthood. The allegations were devastating on paper. Unauthorized practice of law, forged licensure, fraud on the court, deception of vulnerable clients. If the tribunal imposed even a temporary suspension, my active cases could collapse before I ever cleared my name. But I had something Derek didn't count on: years of meticulous record-keeping and the kind of quiet preparation he never learned to respect. I pulled my original admission documents, bar results, oath records, and licensing confirmations from my safe deposit box. Tessa compared them against the forged materials side by side. Ramon dug into procedural inconsistencies and noticed the fake bar notice didn't match the state's official template from that year. Elena brought in a forensic document analyst and a digital forensics expert named Silas. He examined the PDFs the way a surgeon studies scans: quiet, clinical, and deadly when he found the problems. Within hours, the fabric of Derek's lie started to tear. The signature on the fake failure notice belonged to an administrator who had retired 2 years before the date on the letter. The embedded font in the PDF wasn't in use by the state at that time. The digital routing data in the fabricated emails pointed straight back to a machine on Derek's firm network. We had enough evidence for an immediate strong response. Elena asked if I wanted to send everything to bar counsel right away and seek summary dismissal. I should have said yes. It would have been the safest, smartest move. Instead, I looked at her and said, "No. I want him under oath. I want him to commit to this lie in front of the same judge who watched me win the Marcus Hale case." Elena stared at me for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. She understood. Some battles aren't just about winning quickly. They're about making sure the truth lands with full weight. Even so, there was one night, 3 days before the hearing, when the weight of it all hit me. I sat alone in my office long after Ramon and Tessa had gone home. The fake failure notice was on one side of the table. Judge Whitaker's old note was on the other. Outside, rain hammered against the windows so hard it sounded like fingertips. For 10 quiet minutes, I let myself imagine the future Derek was trying to force on me. Suspended, discredited, watching former clients look at me with that wounded confusion people get when they realize they've been betrayed by someone they trusted. Then I unfolded Whitaker's note again and read it slowly. Rare clarity of purpose. Don't let this city dull it. In that moment, I realized my family had always mistaken my silence for weakness. They never understood that silence can be discipline. Silence can be strategy. Silence can be the safety on a very powerful weapon. The next morning, I sent Ramon to the State Bar Admissions Archive with a formal request for certified historical records pulled from the physical microfiche vault. Not the public database. I wanted chain of custody. I wanted embossed seals. I wanted proof that no amount of money or connections could erase quickly. By evening, those documents were in our hands. On the day before the hearing, Elena and I finalized the binders, evidence tabs, and motion outlines. We didn't rehearse anything dramatic. We didn't need drama. We needed precision. Derek would speak first. We would reserve our response. He would commit to the lie. The judge would see. And then we would decide exactly how much truth to deliver. That night, I went to sleep without tears, without fear, and without a single ounce of family left in my heart. I was ready. The hearing room was smaller than I remembered when I walked in that morning. The air felt thicker, heavier with anticipation. Derek stood at the lectern in his navy suit, voice low and sorrowful, telling the panel he had only come forward because the integrity of the profession mattered more to him than blood. He described me as brilliant but unstable, ambitious but dishonest, a woman who had built an entire legal identity on fraud. He submitted the fake letters, the forged emails, the manipulated records, and my parents' affidavits like he was laying flowers on a grave he regretted digging. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. My father refused to look in my direction. Elena quietly reserved our statement. Then Judge Harlan Whitaker reached for the file. He opened it without expression, turned one page, then another, and suddenly went completely still. I watched the color drain from his face, so fast it looked almost unreal. His hand tightened around the folder until his knuckles went white. His eyes lifted and met mine for one long, frozen second. In that moment, I knew he recognized exactly what my brother had done. Without a word, the judge stood up, clutched the file tightly to his chest, and disappeared into his chambers. The room fell into a dead, heavy silence. Derek's polished smile twitched at the corner. My mother stopped breathing. My father's face cycled through offense, confusion, and barely contained fury. and I sat there with my hands still folded, feeling a cold certainty settle over me. Someone was about to be destroyed tonight. It simply wasn't going to be me. 15 minutes later, Judge Whitaker returned. He carried 2 items, my tribunal file and a framed court document. He didn't sit down. He placed the framed document at the center of the bench, facing the entire room. It was the verdict form from the Marcus Hale trial, signed in his own courtroom months earlier. He looked directly at Derek and asked, "Counselor, do you recognize this case?" Derek, still trying to regain his composure, answered, "No, Your Honor." Judge Whitaker's voice remained calm, but carried the full weight of his authority. "This verdict memorializes one of the sharpest defense performances I have seen in 20 years, delivered by the very woman you are accusing of never having passed the bar." You could feel the energy in the room shift. Derek's face didn't collapse immediately. It frayed at the edges. He tried to argue that competence could be faked, that con artists sometimes succeeded because people wanted to believe them. The judge cut him off. He announced that during the recess he had personally contacted the State Bar Admissions Archive, not the online registry, but the physical vault, and obtained certified historical verification. He held up the document. My license was valid, had always been valid. Then he turned to the fake failure letter and calmly pointed out that the administrator whose signature appeared on it had retired 2 years before the date on the document. He addressed the email exhibits and noted that preliminary digital forensics already showed Ink's possible routing history and modern generation data. Derek still tried to hold the line. He claimed there must be some mistake, that he had relied on the materials in good faith. That was when Elena asked for leave to present our rebuttal evidence. Judge Whitaker granted it. Tab by tab, page by page, she dismantled the entire fabrication in public. Font chronology, object tag generation dates, machine identifiers, state seal resolution mismatch, chain of custody certification from the physical archive. And then came the final blow. The internal firm email recovered through emergency preservation. In it, Derek had outlined plans to absorb my client matters after my suspension to help cover the deficit in his escrow accounts before the upcoming audit. The room didn't gasp, it froze. There is a kind of silence more violent than shouting, and we were all living inside it. Judge Whitaker read the email twice, very slowly. When he looked up, the disgust on his face was the kind that empties a man out. He said, "So this was never about ethics. This was theft dressed up as virtue." Derek started talking too fast, the way people do when they feel the floor breaking beneath them. He blamed the IT specialist. Then he blamed a misunderstanding. Then he turned on our parents, saying they had pushed him, that they wanted me gone, that they had demanded he act before I embarrassed the family again. My father actually stood up and shouted that Derek was lying, that he had trusted his son's investigation. My mother began crying, not the elegant tears she usually performed, but ugly, panicked sobs, because she finally understood that reputation could not outrun evidence. Judge Whitaker told them both to sit down. They were no longer grieving witnesses. They were potential accomplices. That was the moment Derek truly broke. He left the lectern, stumbled toward my table, and dropped to his knees right there on the hearing room floor. He grabbed the edge of the counsel table with both hands and looked up at me like a drowning man reaching for air. "Sophia," his voice cracked, "please. You know how this works. If this goes criminal, it destroys everything. I can fix it. I'll transfer the condo. I'll liquidate the accounts. I'll give you anything. Just stop this now." I looked down at him and felt something colder than rage. Rage would have been warmer. What I felt was the quiet, clear satisfaction of seeing the truth strip a man down to his actual size. Behind him, my father took one step backward, as if he didn't want the scene to touch him. My mother whispered Derek's name, but when he turned toward them hoping for rescue, both of them looked away. That was the part I believe hurt him the most. Not the judge's disgust. Not the mountain of evidence. Not even the deputies entering the room on Judge Whitaker's order. It was watching our parents choose distance the exact second he stopped being useful. The same conditional love they had shown me my entire life had finally turned on him. Judge Whitaker directed the sheriff's deputies to take Derek into custody pending referral for perjury, submission of false evidence, obstruction of justice, and potential financial crimes tied to the escrow accounts. As they lifted him, Derek started begging again. Louder, uglier, promising he had only been desperate, that he hadn't meant for it to go this far. Judge Whitaker looked at him and said, "Men like you always mean exactly as far as they believe they can get away with." Then he dismissed all charges against me, with prejudice. He ordered the proceedings sealed as to my record and apologized to me on the record for the abuse of the disciplinary process. I stood up, picked up my briefcase, and asked if I was excused because I had trial the next morning. The corner of Judge Whitaker's mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough to respect. "You are excused, counselor. Unlike the complainant, you have actual work to do." I walked out of that hearing room without looking back. The aftermath moved slower than the explosion in the courtroom, but it was far more permanent. Derek's firm suspended him before sunset and terminated him before the week was over. Their own internal forensic review revealed that the escrow manipulation went far beyond one account. Criminal charges followed quickly. He lost his law license, the condo, the cars, the investments, and most of the people who had only ever valued proximity to his success. My parents were not arrested that day, but they were served, interviewed, and publicly named in enough filings to destroy the polished version of their lives forever. My mother's charity circle stopped calling. My father quietly resigned from 2 hospital boards before he could be pushed out. Within a year, they sold the family house under the excuse of downsizing, though everyone in their world knew exactly why. Derek sent letters at first. Apologies, explanations, handwritten pleas about childhood and blood and regret. I never opened a single one. Elena helped me secure a restraining order after the 3rd attempt to contact my office through intermediaries. The order wasn't emotional. It was clean, professional, and final. My firm survived the attack, not just because we moved fast, but because we had built something real. Clients started coming to me not in spite of what happened, but because of it. Judges who once only knew me by reputation now saw exactly how I handled pressure when that pressure carried my own last name. Ramon framed the dismissal order and hung it in the conference room. Tessa jokingly called it our new family portrait. I kept Judge Whitaker's old note in my desk, but after the hearing I placed something beside it. A copy of Derek's disciplinary dismissal against me, stamped and sealed. Not because I still needed vindication, but because I wanted a permanent reminder of what survival looks like when you stop asking permission. A year later, I expanded the practice and launched a legal defense fund for young attorneys from working class backgrounds who were being quietly squeezed out of the profession by money, pedigree, and institutional games. I did it because I knew exactly how many gatekeepers confuse power with worth. And I did it because revenge, when done right, shouldn't only punish what tried to break you. It should build something stronger in the space that damage leaves behind. Sometimes people ask me if I feel sorry for Derek now. The honest answer is no. I understand him better than I wish I did, but Understanding is not the same as absolution. He wasn't a tragic man trapped by circumstances. He was a man who believed his future mattered more than my existence. He made that choice over and over again until the law finally answered him in a language he respected. As for my parents, I had buried them emotionally long before any court made the distance official. Blood is not a covenant when it only ever flows in one direction. Family is not the people who claim your name while trying to destroy your life. Family is the people who stand beside the truth even when it costs them something. By the time the last appeal deadlines passed and the dust finally settled, I stopped thinking of that night as the moment my brother tried to end me. I started thinking of it as the night the lie of my family finally ended instead. They accused me of practicing law illegally because they never understood what law actually meant to me. To them, it was status, leverage, access. The right last name in the right room. To me, it was always simpler. It was the cleanest, most honest weapon I had ever held. And when the people who should have protected me tried to turn that weapon against me, I used it better. So let me leave you with this question. If your own family tried to bury you to save themselves, would you ever forgive them once the truth came out? Or would you do what I did? Walk out, lock the door behind you, and let your life become the answer. Thank you for sitting with me through this entire story. If it touched something in you, if it made you feel a little less alone in your own quiet battles, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your worth was never up for negotiation. Protect your peace. It's the one thing no one can take from you unless you allow it. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay clear, stay strong, and keep building your own table.